Now we have to interrupt our narrative about these reformers, about Athens, to talk about the problem that the Greeks had with the Persians. A lot of Greeks were leaving Greece and heading into what is today Turkey. Of course, some of them went into Italy, so we find Greek influence on all these places. But the Greeks who set up colonies in Turkey found themselves suddenly conquered by the Persians. Well, the Greeks did not like to think they'd be conquered, so they moved in and they began to help their fellow Greeks resist the Persians. The Persian king Darius decided it was time to deal with the Greeks, so he came in with an army with the intent to conquer the Greeks. To deal with the Persian challenge, the Greeks at least united temporarily. The Greeks and Persians met at the plain called Marathon. The Persians greatly outnumbered the Greeks, but a Greek general, the book names him, I'm not going to ask you to learn the name, but a Greek general said, I think we can win, and he had them run with their shields several hundred feet to engage the Persians. Now, here's where the Greeks won. Number one, they had trained in their gymnasiums. Number two, they were constant runners anyway, even up to the time they were in their 60s and 70s, they would run constantly. They were in excellent shape, and after running several hundred feet, it was said the Greek soldiers were not even tired. Then they clashed with the Persians. The Persians were not used to an army where the men stood shoulder to shoulder, and you couldn't fight with one of them individually, you had to fight with the whole team. The Greeks were better armed and had more incentive. The Greeks fought for patriotism. The Persians, it was said, fought to save their skin. The Battle of Marathon was a victory for the Greeks, and it sent the Persian king home in defeat. Now, you might have heard about Marathon. I had someone ask if Nike shoes, Nike shoes has what to do with it. Marathon is 26 miles from Athens. Now, in the Greek army was a runner, a champion runner who'd won an olive leaf during the Greek Olympics. And by the way, the Greeks were the inventors of the Olympic Games. But anyway, Thucydides had won the race and got an olive leaf. So when the Persians came, it was up to Thucydides to run from one city-state to another to tell the Greeks where the Persians were. After running 150 miles, it's only ran that much, he was a little bit tired. And you might think they should have exempted him from fighting the battle. Hey, you've done a lot of your share of running, but no one was exempt. He had to fight the battle. Then when the battle was over, they said, okay, you're still our fastest runner, and run to Athens and tell your fellow Athenians. Well, he got to the Athens square, and his last words got were, victory is ours. And he dropped down dead. Ever since, runners have run 26 miles to prove that it can be done. And we still have a marathon in our Olympics today, a 26-mile run that commemorates Thucydides running back from the battlefield to the city of Athens to tell them that we won a victory. Well, Darius went home in defeat. The next king, Xerxes decided that he could defeat the Greeks. So he came along with an even bigger army that was supposedly more trained and better equipped. And he planned to defeat the Greeks. Themistocles, and again, folk, I'm not going to ask you to learn that name, but Themistocles got up and made several speeches encouraging the Greeks to develop a strong navy, which they did. And on page 102, your book shows a picture of, they're called triremes. They're huge ships, but the ships were moved by oars, and the slaves would sit, there would be one deck of slaves, and above them would be another deck, so the slaves would sit on two decks and row the boat, and they could, it took hundreds of slaves, they could move him in a big boat. But anyway, Xerxes did not initially meet the Greeks in the water. He met them at a pass called Thermopylae. Thermopylae. Now, there was a movie a few years ago about Thermopylae, and according to the movie, somebody said we can shoot enough arrows to block out the sun, and the Spartans replied, well then, good for you, we'll fight you in the shade of the arrows. Well, 300 Spartans stood at the pass of Thermopylae, and they stood neck to neck. Now, here's an outline of what it looked like. There were hills, a tall ravine on each, tall hills on each side. So the army was standing shoulder to shoulder with their shields, 300 strong. And the Persians, of course, had a much bigger army than the 300 Spartans. But the Spartan king Leonidas stood his ground, and he stood until a traitor, in other words, someone who was really Greek but who joined up with the Persians, showed the Persians a way around the pass. And of course, when the Persian army got behind the Spartans were not protected from the rear, and all 300 Spartans were killed. The Spartans fought without surrendering and fought to the last man. And again, at the end of the fight, all 300 were killed. This battle, again, has been commemorated in at least one recent movie, and maybe a few more. But the 300 Spartans gave a good account of themselves by killing a whole lot more Persians than what they had killed.
What?
Yes?
Is that like movie 300?
Yeah, I meant to depict, what would have seen. I didn't do all 300 shields. They were not all side by side. They were one in front of the other. The whole black formation, like I talked about last time, they could, when the man up front got killed, another man took his place. But they stood in a pass, and with the tall hills on each side of them, talking about a mountain pass. And they stood in a pathway, the 300 of them, but all 300 were killed when the Persians got around behind. As long as they could keep the Persians in front of them, those 300 well-trained Spartans could stand up to a fairly big army. But again, they were betrayed. Now, we come to the Battle of Salamis. It was a navy fight. It was said that the Persian king Xerxes said, build me a throne overlooking the Athens harbor so that I can watch my people defeat the Greeks. They built him a wooden throne, and he sat and watched while his navy lost to the Athenian navy, or lost to the Greek navy. Now, essentially, the Greek triremes were bigger and better, and the Greek seamen were far better than the Persian seamen. Persia does have a sea coast, but most of Persia is far on the land, far away from the ocean, whereas in the case of the Greeks have a small country with a huge sea coast. The Greeks were better seamen. Now, there is a story that one of the Greek scientists, stood on a bank overlooking the harbor with a huge concave mirror and focused the sunlight on the Persian ships and set them on fire. Now, most of you as kids might have played with magnifying glasses, where you use the sunlight to set a piece of paper on fire, to set a leaf on fire. And yeah, I used to burn my hand with a magnifying glass until I felt the pain. But now, some scientists today have tried this experiment. They've gotten on the same place where the Greek philosophers supposedly stood, and tried several different concave mirrors with several different kinds of wooden boats, and they have not yet been able to set one of them on fire. How the Greek man did it, if he did, we don't know, but that's the story that was told to us and was believed for a good many generations, but today we can't seem to duplicate it. Anyway, King Xerxes, like his father, went back home in defeat. Well, after the wars were over, the Greeks were expecting the Persians to return. However, the Persians never did. Instead, the Greeks wound up conquering Persia later.